The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. The sisters Martha and Mary sent this message to Jesus. Lord, the man you love is ill. On receiving the message, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death, but in God's glory, and through it the Son of God will be glorified. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, yet when he learned that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was for 2 more days before saying to the disciples, let us go to Judea. On arriving, Jesus found that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days already. When Martha heard that Jesus had come, she went to meet him. Mary remained sitting in the house. Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, whatever you ask of God, he will grant you. Your brother, said Jesus to her, will rise again. Martha said, I know he will rise again at the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. If anyone believes in me, even though he dies, he will live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she said, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who was to come into the world. Jesus said in great distress, with a sigh that came straight from the heart, where have you put him? They said, see how much he loved him. But there were some who remarked, he opened the eyes of the blind man. Could he not have prevented this man's death? Still sighing, Jesus reached the tomb. It was a cave with a stone to close the opening. And Jesus said, take the stone away. Martha said to him, Lord, by now he will smell. This is the 4th day. Jesus replied, have I not told you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you for hearing my prayer. I knew indeed that you always hear me, but I speak for the sake of all those who stand around me, so that they may believe it was you who sent me. When he had said this, he cried in a loud voice, Lazarus, here, come out. The man came out, his feet and hands bound with bands of stuff, and a cloth round his face. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go free. Many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what he did believed in him. This is the gospel of the Lord.
This morning's gospel is a very dramatic gospel. It's a gospel of raising the dead. And it's a challenging gospel, because if Jesus could raise the dead, and he raised Lazarus, why didn't he raise everybody else? Why didn't he raise other friends? In the time of Jesus, many people died very young. Jesus would have been considered old, even in his 30s, because people died young. Why didn't Jesus raise everybody else? And in the gospel, we have Jesus healing the sick. But he didn't heal all the sick. He healed some. Why didn't he heal everyone? And if he healed everyone, that period in history would be an unbelievable history. They would come not only from Judea and Jerusalem, they'd come from everywhere. You imagine if somebody told you, if you go to this spot, and it happens now, you will be healed. You will get there no matter how much money it cost, no matter how difficult it was, especially if you had a child or someone you loved. So it kind of raises the question, if Jesus could do this, why didn't he do it? Why didn't he raise everybody? And why didn't he cure everybody? And the reason Jesus didn't do this, because life and death are together. Death is part of life. Sickness is part of life. It's the human condition. It's not a perfect world. It's a world that has arbitrary things that happen. It is a world that people can get sick in. It's a world that people can die in. And so the thought often, well, where is God if that's it? Because most of us think God is only present if you're healthy. That's a real sign that you're loved by God. And if you're alive, of course. Otherwise, where's God? But Jesus was teaching something different. And perhaps one of the great tragedies of the time of Jesus, when somebody got sick, people thought they had been rejected by God, that they did something evil. That's why they're sick. And it's terrible. And when people died, they said, well, that's it, it's over. And so Jesus was teaching something different. He wasn't about raising the dead. He wasn't about healing everyone. He wasn't about changing the world. He was about showing people what the world is really like. And he did a demonstration with regard to raising the dead to show that God was there. He healed some sick to show that God was there. But his message was that God is with every sick person. That God is with every person that dies. And to live a life of faith is to realize in this broken world, with our sickness and with our troubles and with our death, God is there. And if God is there, we can find life in the midst of sickness, in the midst of trouble, and in the midst of even death. And Jesus is kind of asking us to be people who believe. And what we say about faith so often is that, yes, I will believe as long as everything is good for me. But Jesus is saying, hold it. God is in the things that go wrong. And when we learn, or when we live out of the belief that God is in the things that go wrong, there's nothing that goes wrong that we can't handle. Because God is there. Not only can we handle it, we become stronger for it. And God is in the sickness. You say, my God, how can God be in the sickness? You're miserable. Sickness is part of life. God is there to give us strength. He's there to give us courage. He's there to inspire us. And when we enter into the sickness, whatever it is, God is there to help us. We're not abandoned by God. And for a lot of people, the moment of sickness in their life, especially when they're cured after, oftentimes was a great blessing. I have a niece, a young niece who's in her 30s, had some kind of a really complicated illness and had to leave work and everything, great job, living alone, and for 2 years going back and forth to the doctors with all kinds of tests and transfusions and everything. And in the midst of that, she wrote me an email and she said, you know, in some strange way, I'm glad this happened. She says, because I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about life. I see the value in things that I've never seen before. This was a young girl who was still sick at the time. And so what we're called to realize is that because we're believers, it doesn't mean we sail through life without any sickness or without any death. But we do sail through life. And we do encounter our sickness, and we find God in it, and we find strength in it. And we even encounter death. And we realize that the people that die, when we're real believers, the people that die are still very connected to us. They're not gone somewhere, never to be seen again. When you're a believer, you know, they become part of your heart on a deeper level. We're all still connected. That's what Jesus was teaching us. He said, don't get depressed about the sickness and troubles and death of life. Find that God is with us always in everything and everywhere. And you look at this crisis that's going on now, and God is in that. God is in this crisis. And some fanatics will say, oh yeah, because God sent it. God didn't send anything like that. But you look at the terrible things that are happening, and terrible things that are happening as true. There are people that are dying, and there are people because of it perhaps starving. and especially children, is tragic. But again, in the midst of this tragedy, you all realize too, there's so much goodness. My God, do you see the health workers taking chances for the sake of the sick? People working with people that are infected because they need to be worked with, and very little gear, but they do it. What a sign of love. What a sign of the human spirit, a sign of what it means to be truly alive. And there's people going out of the way, being creative, looking after old people, looking after people that are isolated. All kinds of goodness in the midst of this tragedy. Like, it's not all negative. And at the end of the day, when all of this stuff is over, and it will run its course, it's quite possible that we could be a much better people. We could be much gentler and more considerate of one another. And we could realize how fragile we all are and how much we need to take care of one another. It's so easy to judge everybody and think, well, that person got it made. You look at the television and you see, well, that person doesn't have it made. You have the fellow over in England, Prince Charles, with it. You have the Prime Minister with it. The Canadian Prime Minister's wife had it. Like, nobody got it made. We're all alike. But sometimes we just think that some people got it made and others don't. No, we're all very fragile in this world. We all need one another. And as much as we need one another, Christ says there's something else you need. You need your God. And our God gives us strength in all of these circumstances. And at the end of the day, in spite of all the things that have gone wrong, and all the pain and suffering and even death, God gives us consolation and strength, and believe it or not, even joy. Joy not for ourselves, but joy to share with one another, to encourage one another. Our faith sometimes leaves us so wrapped up in ourselves and so concerned about ourselves that we forget about others. Jesus teaches us, be concerned about one another, care for one another, because in our caring and concern for one another, we find the presence of our God. For a moment in this list of crisis and pain, never ever forget that God is with us. And in spite of it all, there will be life, there will be resurrection, there will be joy.